instead of reducing it, we continue to borrow. We would greatly appreciate it if the DBCC could give some revenue mobilization plan if expenditure continues to increase.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, if I may. Yes, there is a plan. There's a fiscal consolidation plan. As I did mention earlier, in 2021 or in 2022, during the pandemic, the deficit was 8.6%. That in 2022, when BBM became president in 22, we brought that down to 7.3%. In 2023, it went down to 6.2%. In 2024, we brought that further down to 5.7%. In 2025, we expect it to go down to 5.5% all the way to 2028 to 4.3%. Ergo, in 2030, down to 3.1%. And because of that, your debt to GDP ratio by then will roughly be 58% of GDP. Your total debt, you have the slide on the total. Yeah, it's here. Okay. In 2028, we expect the economy to roughly be 36.3 trillion, and our total debt would roughly be 21.9 trillion. That would have a debt to GDP of 60.3%. But having said that, the more appropriate benchmark today being used is general government debt. And as far as that number is concerned, we're roughly at about 53% today. As in my presentation earlier, we showed you our benchmarking in the region. And we're in the middle of the pack, so to speak. But having said that, we're also one of the fastest growing economies in the region. Yes. So yes, we do have a plan.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Secretary Recto, for the response. Still on this topic, looking at the presentation of both the DOF and the DBM earlier, if you combine the current operating expense and MOOE, the total will exceed government revenue. And this was earlier underscored by the good Secretary of Finance. The forecast for 2026 is that the current operating expense will exceed government revenue. Isn't this bad fiscal management, looking at it from the outside? And if that's the case, would it mean that we are barely able to finance our daily operation? And are we bordering on borrowing to finance the daily operation of the government?
As I did mention earlier, like in 2026, the budget will be 6.630 trillion. Our total revenues will be less than 5 trillion, 4,983 billion. Ergo, the deficit will be 1,646 trillion. The deficit, lahat ng capital outlay na gagastusin ng ating gobyerno this year and next year will be coming from debt. Having said that, it is more important now to ensure that we spend this money wisely, to ensure that the economy grows at a faster rate than your debt. So the idea is to outgrow our debt. So that is not new. If you take a look at the numbers, if you look at, let's say, our borrowing cost today, the latest RTB was roughly 6%. If inflation is 3%, the real cost of money is 3%. If the economy grows by 6, then you win 3. Using other people's money. So like I said, what is important is that we choose the right projects, we make the right investments, we make sure that the economy grows at a faster rate than the debt is growing.
Madam Chair, we would like to thank the good Secretary of Finance for being very candid about this issue. Nakalubha hapong nakaka-alarma yung nabanggit kanina na yung lahat halos ng capital outlay natin for this year and next year ay uutangin natin.
Yeah.
At
just to add to that, 80% niyan inuutang natin sa ating sarili, domestic. So nang ibig sabihin yan, so 80%, so if we have a liability, someone has an asset, right? 1 month, a bond is a liability but an asset to someone. So if we have a liability of 17 trillion, 80% of that is domestic. It is an asset of the Filipino people as well, yung 80% na yan, di ba? So binabayaran din natin yung ating sarili. And that's how we manage our debt. But of course, there are limits. And that's why I'm saying that we're reducing the deficit over time. And we're mindful about the benchmarks on debt to GDP, on general government debt to GDP, on interest rates, on inflation, and growth rate. Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Madam Chair, I would like to again to thank the good Secretary for being very clear about this issue. Muli po, nais natin i-reiterate na lubha po nakaka-alarma yung ganitong trend na halos halos kalahati ng ating budget ay inuutang po natin at hindi natin nakukuha mula sa ating pong sariling revenue. And in this slide, Madam Chair, I'd like to request the DBCC to submit a disaggregated data on these approved loans and how much interest have we paid despite the delay in the start of the projects due to the unprogrammed appropriations in the last two budget cycles. May I have that commitment, Madam Chair?
We will provide the data and information to the committee, Madam Chair.
And a related request would be a breakdown ng taxes from tobacco, sugary beverages, etc. Just to check if this is consistent with what is stated on the law when it comes to the allocation for PhilHealth.
Yes, Madam Chair, we will provide.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, Madam Chair. Just my last two questions would be this question will be for the BSP. Earlier, you've mentioned about the decrease in inflation. That's very good. And thank you for explaining the monetary approach to managing inflation. But for the previous years, we have seen that inflation is mostly on the supply side. So what is the government doing to address the supply side inflation?
Thank you ho. Ang pinakita ho namin kanina, pagkatapos ho noong nung nagsimula ang Russia-Ukraine crisis, nakita nating tumaas ang antas ng inflation. Karamihan ho nito ay supply shocks, gaya ho ng sinabi ninyo. May mga combination ho ng policies na ginawa ang gobyerno at ang BSP. Kami ho sa side ng BSP, nagtaas ho kami ng interest rates para i-manage yung inflation expectations. Ang gobyerno din naman ho, binigyan ng pansin yung mga shocks sa ating food systems. Halimbawa, kung nagkaroon ng disruptions dahil sa weather system o kung hindi nagkaroon ng pagkukulang ng production during that time, may mga temporary measures ho na ginawa noon para magkaroon tayo ng access sa mga produkto from abroad para mabigyan ng additional supply yung ating domestic market. And ayun ho yung mga ginawa nila. But these are short-term measures, as also explained by the national government. It was explained this morning that the government is also focusing on long-term measures to help facilitate food security and modernize agriculture. That's very important if you want to stabilize food inflation, a very important component of the overall inflation, and also in managing food inflation moving forward. So ito ho yung in-explain kanina ng DepDev at saka ng DOF, DBM, investing on agriculture, investing on infrastructure to help improve our economy and manage inflation.
Maraming salamat, sir. And for my last question, in your presentation earlier today, particularly sa slide number 7, pinakita po natin dito yung negative export growth for 2025. What is the basis for positive forecast in 2026? Have you taken into consideration the impact of the U.S. tariffs on our electronic sector? What is our strategy to ease this impact? And despite this, do you still see export growth in 2026?
Marami hong salamat, Madam Chair. If you look at our exports, a large part of it is due to electronics, including semi-electronics. In previous years, in the past 2 years, there have been adjustments in the sector. There has been what is called an inventory adjustment because of some production that were done after the pandemic. But because of the oversupply of some of the segments in the electronics, particularly semiconductor, the order book for such product categories have to adjust. And that's the reason why we were having reduction in demand, reduction in our exports of some of these commodities, particularly in the semiconductor. Now that that inventory adjustment is at its last phase, we hope that we can get advantage in the expansion of the other segments of the electronics as well as semiconductor industry. The uncertainty because of what's happening in the tariff adjustments, we have recognized that in our projections. That's why we think that the recovery could be modest initially. We continue to await the progress and the developments in these discussions on tariffs to help us adjust later on if there's a need in terms of our export projections. But there are also other segments that we are looking at, including agri-based and garments industry as possible sources of trade diversion benefits. The Economic Development Agency is studying this very closely together with their monitoring of the developments in the tariff policies of other countries. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Maraming salamat po. Maraming salamat, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Representative Cendaña. From the majority, may we now recognize the next interpellator, Representative Mark Coangco. Next is Vice Chair Leandro Leviste.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to thank the entire economic team for all of their diligent work in preparing the materials for today, and thank our dear family friends who are also here and whom I would like to address some of these questions to. First of all, I would like to confirm that based on the economic team's presentation for 2026, there are projections for approximately 5 trillion in government revenues and 6.6 trillion in government expenditures, resulting in approximately 1.6 trillion of a deficit. So in this case, conceptually, if we have identified approximately 200 billion pesos in wasteful spending, we could either reduce the deficit, reallocate spending, or lower taxes. May I confirm if this is conceptually correct?
For budget deliberations, it is the prerogative of Congress to cut the budget. The only limitation is that you cannot increase the budget, but you can cut the budget.
Yeah, so I would just like to confirm that the economic team would not have an objection to cutting hypothetically identified wasteful spending and reallocating this to more productive spending.
That is correct.
And also cutting such spending and reallocating some of it to tax cuts, as long as this would not increase the deficit.
Tax cuts will not be part of the deliberations of the budget. That would be a separate matter altogether.
Yes, I would just like to confirm that conceptually, if the deficit does not increase, that the economic team would not have an objection to reducing wasteful spending and then reducing taxes.
In 2027, you will still have a deficit. In 28, you will still have a deficit. In 29, you will still have a deficit. So it will be very, very difficult to cut taxes.
The premise of the question is that the deficit provided here is 1.6 trillion, which I believe would be approximately 6% of GDP. So if we maintain a deficit of approximately 6% of GDP, then theoretically we could cut taxes as long as we stay less than 6% of GDP.
My advice is that when the deficit gets down to 3%, then we can start talking about cutting taxes.
I do not object to the target of having a deficit of less than 3%. So we take it from the economic team that if we can reduce the deficit to less than